Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. We are now not officially into summer, but we're past the Memorial Day weekend. So it's, summer is right around the corner and holidays are starting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tongue twister, but it's meteorological summer, June, July, and August.
Right.
So technically we're there, and I'm looking out my backyard with flowers and everything else all over the place. And when I open the door, I sneeze from the pollen. But other than that, everything's great. So,
All right. Well, we have a special guest with us this week. We have Jessica Lastarza. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are.
And Jessica, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'd love to. So my name, Jessica Lastarza, and I live in West Hartford, Connecticut. I just moved back here about 6 years ago after spending about 20, we'll just call it 20 something years up in Boston, where I moved after college. And I am a family law mediator and a collaborative divorce attorney. And I just recently started a new business or opened my company, which is called We Mediate, which focuses on just that, out of court alternative dispute resolutions for couples and families who need to mediate family law issues.
All right. So for those of our listeners that might not be familiar with the term, what is collaborative divorce?
So there are actually 4 ways you can get divorced in the state of Connecticut. And there's the do-it-yourself sort of kitchen table divorce, we call it, where, couples sit down at a table and kind of hash out the property division and the kids. Unfortunately, no real insurance when you do it that way. There's a lot to know about what the law says. It's really important to understand rights that you're waiving, any obligations that you're creating. The second way you can get divorced is through having separate attorneys represent you, an in-court divorced, sometimes contested, often litigated divorce. And then there are 2 other ways to get divorced, which are what we call these alternative dispute resolution processes. One is mediation, and then one is a collaborative divorce. And they have some similarities and some differences. In a collaborative divorce, each spouse has their own legal representation. And it's also often a multidisciplinary approach, meaning that there is also often a neutral financial professional and also a neutral mental health professional. And all of the parties sign what's called a participation agreement, where they are all pledging to help the couple reach an out-of-court resolution. And if at any point in the process that those negotiations break down, all of the professionals actually have to withdraw and the parties have to start off with separate legal counsel. So it's an out-of-court divorce. Again, there can be up to 4 professionals. It's still done in a similar fashion to a mediation, in the sense that it's very goal-oriented and needs-focused. So we really try to focus on what the needs and the goals are of each of the couples, and we try to craft solutions that focus on those needs and those goals rather than on specific outcomes.
All right. And of course, we've talked on many, many podcasts about the importance of setting goals. We've also talked about the importance of communication. And it sounds like both of those are key components of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely key components. So what happens is when couples focus on their needs and their goals rather than on their wants, first of all, it allows room for compromise. It allows a lot more room for creative problem solving. And in both a collaborative and a mediation process, we're really focused on moving the couple forward. You can't mediate the past. We're not playing the blame game, but we're trying to really figure out, how do we help everybody kind of find common ground, find that sweet spot of everybody can live with what everybody can live with, and then move them forward for that next phase. So when I'm beginning a mediation or a collaborative process with clients, the first thing I usually say is, try to think ahead to a year from now and paint a picture of what you want your life to look like. And that could be with respect to co-parenting goals. It could be with respect to career or where you're living, or the type of, place that you're living. And when we focus on those goals, we find that we reach agreements that have much more durable results too, because they are focused on what they're very intentional, right? Instead of just kind of, coming up with some guesswork about, what people think they want. You're really coming up with very intentional solutions, that I think lead to longer lasting happiness and satisfaction.
Definitely. That's almost the same focus we use in my performance coaching when I'm dealing with business owners or entrepreneurs. We have them picture where they want to be in a year. What is the business going to look like? Where are they working? All of the details. And the more detail we can get from them, the better. And then, of course, we work backwards going, okay, that's the picture of where you want to be. This is the picture of where you are now. Let's put together the steps to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in visualization and manifestation, and really thinking about that stuff, I think brings it to fruition. And I think also when you do this with clients in a divorce setting, I think a lot of times if you do that at the beginning, clients find that they actually have a lot of goals in common. So, they're sort of at this crossroads where they've made this decision to separate or to divorce. And sometimes they come in thinking, my gosh, well, it's going to be me versus him or her, that they're going to be sort of pitted against one another. But you actually find out through this goal setting, which, we have everybody talk about it out loud, in front of one another, you find that they actually have a lot of the same common goals. And that helps a lot in terms of setting the framework for the mediation and the communication between the two parties.
Yeah, the way that I look at it too, obviously you and I got attracted to each other because we basically preach the same thing and do different things with it. But when you have a conflict, if you can sit down with somebody like you, and I love the word focus, because if you refocus them from what they're ticked off about, what the baggage is, and all this other kind of stuff and whatever,
Right.
which if you don't use someone like you, is going to cost them gobs of money if they're going to go to court and fight to get everything there. If you can set the tone up front and they're willing to listen and get coached through this process. I mean, you and I talked about one of the things that may happen moving ahead once they have worked with you is that their relationships with each other and with everybody else moving ahead are a lot better for having gone through the process too, because even though they may not agree on everything and so on and so forth, at least they have a basic understanding and saw a little bit of good in the process going through it, rather than just walking away with hard feelings for the rest of their lives and $1 million, that kind of thing. So it's so important to refocus to what's really important, and that's the needs and so on. And we're full of really busy minds, and we're mostly thinking about all the negative things and so on and so forth. And if you can just focus on the good things that are there and what you have to do moving ahead and so on and so forth to just achieve really a healthy lifestyle moving ahead for both of you, for your families, if you have kids involved and everything else, everybody that you relate with, instead of, walking on eggshells for the rest of your life. I love the process. And, when I heard that's what you do, and the first time I heard you do your commercial and networking meeting, I said, yep, the world needs a whole lot more than that. And, I talk about the kindness platform, just leading with love and kindness before you get to everything else. And if you give that a shot first, chances are, if you're invested in it, you might work a little bit of magic in the process and come out way ahead of the game.
100%. And I always say to clients at the beginning of the process that you don't always have a say in whether or not you get divorced, but you do have a say in how you get divorced. And you have choices. And we're trying to focus on the future, and we're trying to focus on making those choices. So you have a say in how all of this ends up when you mediate and when you do a collaborative divorce. As opposed to leaving it up to a judge. This really empowers couples to make their own decisions, and they're in the best position to make decisions about what's going to happen in their lives. And truthfully, judges love when couples mediate, because judges don't want that on their shoulders. They don't want to decide what's the best thing for your kids, or, what's the best way to divide your property. They really want to see people empowered to make those decisions for themselves as well. So, and the other thing you said, Chip, that I just want to touch on is, you kind of talked about, the future, like how you want even your relationship to look, right? Like mediation and collaborative divorce really allow the communication pathways to remain open. Particularly, this is so important, particularly with couples who have children, right? Because you are going to continue co-parenting for a long time. You're always going to be the parents of those kids, even though you may not be married anymore. And what do you want that to look like for your children? Even when they're beyond the age of majority, right? They're getting married, they're having their own children. What do you want that to look like? And how do you want to show up for your family, down the road?
So I have to ask, you had mentioned that in the mediation process, you focus on each person's goals, and sometimes it turns out that they have the same goals. Have you ever had a situation where suddenly the couple realized, wait a minute, we do actually want the same things? If we had been communicating this, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to this point.
Yeah, I have seen that a couple of times. I actually had one couple, so first of all, I never ask couples why they're getting divorced again, because, it's a no fault state, irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. We don't have to give grounds for the divorce. And again, we're problem solving. We're looking forward, not backward. So I never ask that question. Every now and then I do have clients who come in who just seem like, I sit there and I wonder, like, why are they getting divorced? What's happening here? And sometimes I ultimately do ask that question. I did have one couple who, it turns out, they were getting divorced. Really, they were an older couple and they just didn't really want to kind of keep all their finances together, but they decided to do a legal separation instead of a divorce, because they really did sort of want to stay together. They just didn't want to, permanently end everything. So it does happen every once in a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes to show just how important communication is in a relationship, in any relationship, a personal relationship, a friendship, a spouse, a business partner. Communication really is key. And without that, things can fall apart pretty quickly.
That's for sure. And have you guys heard of something called discernment therapy or discernment counseling? So discernment counseling is when a couple is actually unsure of whether or not they should get divorced. They can meet with somebody who is a discernment counselor. And the counselor, their job is not to help the couple stay together, but really to evaluate where they are and to help them determine whether or not it's something that they want to fix, or whether or not they truly would be better off sort of, dissolving their marriage and moving on. So, to your point, like a lot of times when couples go through discernment counseling, they realize, hey, this is something we can fix and we both want to work on this, and it helps them, refocus the communication, because it's hard. I mean, being married is really hard, right? I mean, communication in general is
Yes,
hard. People have different communication styles. That can be tricky.
it is. It's very tricky. In fact, when we bring on clients, we actually do a behavioral assessment that tells us what their communication style is. And it's absolutely amazing, because I have been in client meetings where I have seen two people arguing and I had to stop them and say, do you guys realize you're saying the exact same thing in different ways? And because their communication styles are different, they were clashing over nothing.
Right. Do you guys do the Myers-Briggs or some other kind of test? Those Myers-Briggs tests are brilliant. I mean, they give you so much insight into how you're communicating, right?
Yep.
How how people want to communicate with you. Like it should almost be mandatory in, every single job setting and every relationship. Maybe everybody should sit down and do a Myers-Briggs before they get married. Then again, I might put myself out of business. I don't know.
Yeah, the assessments are fantastic tools, because most people don't understand how they communicate, never mind how somebody else communicates. So you're dealing with the barrier of not knowing yourself combined with the barrier of not knowing someone else, that's how situations escalate.
That's it. So I do a lot of, in my mediations, a lot of reframing, you know, taking what somebody said and reframing it in a different way, that maybe will fall a little more gently on the other person's ears. The other thing that I really like to do is, I don't know, have you heard of imago therapy? Something I've been learning a lot more about recently, where you ask the other person to repeat what the other person said, right? And then that person has to say whether or not they got it right, yes or no. I think imago comes from the Italian word of image, right? So you're reflecting back. And that's really helpful in mediations when you reach an impasse, because sometimes there's some really hurt feelings and people are really upset and they really just want to know that the other person hears them and understands them. So, like that reflective listening and really kind of saying back to the person what it is that they're hearing, and then you keep going until they get it right. And sometimes when you do that in a session that's really like high conflict session, and the person does get it right, you can see the other person just kind of go, like, finally you understood what I was saying.
Yes. Yes, we actually had an episode just a few months ago on active listening. And it is so important in communication to truly listen, not, parrot what you think somebody said or what you felt they said, but what they actually said. And there is a big difference when you look at something from someone else's point of view and what they're trying to say, rather than what you're putting your spin on what they're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I was just at a conference for the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce on Friday. That's sort of that's our big mediation body here in Connecticut. And the first speaker spoke a lot about sort of that active listening and sort of the statistics behind listening, and the fact that, I'm trying to remember what it was exactly. The way we hear things is so much like our brain is processing things so much more quickly than the information that we're taking in. So it's really, really hard, right, to stay focused on what you're hearing and what the other person is saying, because your brain is going a million miles an hour. It's starting to form these biases about what the person is saying or who the person is. So it's definitely a learned skill, I think, and something that takes practice.
It is a learned skill. And as you just mentioned, people do come to conversations with their own bias. They expect the other person to behave a certain way or say a certain thing. So they are more likely to think they heard what they expected to hear than what was actually said.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
I talk all the time about the pause between your initial reaction to something and your response to something. And that's what it is, because I may be looking at you, but I may be saying, okay, come on, Jessica, just finish what you're going to say, because I got to say this, and so on and so forth. But you're seeing right through me, realizing that I'm being impatient there. And so the key is getting people to listen, to understand, not to necessarily agree and so on and so forth, but just respect where somebody else is coming from, because we are all different. And you've heard me talk about, creation, everybody coming from good, but we were given free will too. And everybody's free will is different. That's what gets us wonderful things in this world, and also all the problems in this world. So it's so important. I love your approach. Focus basically is a wraparound for all this stuff. I mean, focus means listening, trying to understand, whether you agree or not, and really, really wanting to work this thing out, whether it's for yourself or for your children and so on and so forth. So a lot of this, it's not rocket science. It's just things that we already know. And you're just getting people to just sit there, take time out, and let's take a look at it this way, because you can look at it this way. And once you get into this, that this has always been there for you to look at it this way. So
that's right. And that's one of my most important jobs as a mediator, is to have that non-judgmental listening, and to have that safe space for clients where they can sit and they can talk about these things. And as a mediator, I'm a neutral, so I'm not representing either party. And that means I can't advocate for them. I can't make decisions for them. So I facilitate their communication, and I give them that safe space to talk about things about, that are going to impact their future, their kids, their relationship. And that non-judgmental space, I think, really helps people because, they can speak freely. And we try to, we set ground rules at the beginning of the process to kind of, keep things moving, because we need to be productive and we need to respect each other. And we always talk about what those ground rules are at the beginning of any process as well. Even taking turns talking, everybody's going to get a chance to be heard. And that's all really important.
Yeah, it is important that everybody is heard, that everybody listens. I'm actually reminded of a joke that I just reposted several days ago on Facebook. The therapist says, well, the problem with your marriage is you don't talk. And the husband said, of course we talk. We talk all the time. And the therapist says, well, what do you talk about? And the husband said, I don't know. I don't listen. Yeah. If you're going to talk, you have to listen. It all goes together. That's what communication is. And it is so important that both parties, again, and this is the same in a marriage as it is in a business relationship, in a friendship, communication has to be two ways, and there has to be participation from both parties.
Yeah, you said it. That's exactly right. Both people have to participate. And it's a give and take too, right? There's just so many. I mean, there's a lot to think about, really, right? You don't want to dominate the conversation either. You want to listen. You also don't want to just sit there and be a sponge, right? And not give anything back. Like you also, you need to contribute to it as well. There's a lot that goes into it. And some people are really master communicators. And they're so impressive to hear them.
Yeah, I would imagine though that when you're sitting down with people, a lot of times you see changes in both of them as you go through the process because they're not used to listening to each other and expressing themselves. And now part of the ground rules is that you have to do that. And as you hear more and more and you go through the process and you're getting closer to settling something amicably and getting this through, I'm sure you're probably seeing them starting to blossom a lot more as far as communication, but most importantly, as far as listening and kind of rekindling those skills that they had in the first place, because it's not going to work if they don't.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think in most cases, I would say that's true, right? You always have a couple of, those scenarios where you have sort of high conflict personalities who, there's a whole different set of rules of, on how to best communicate and move that type of personality through a mediation. But yeah, I think the mediation process is interesting because sometimes people are hearing for the first time things from the other person that they never heard about. I didn't know that you didn't like that, or I never thought that was important to you. When it comes to something with the kids, a lot of times it's things on like even college. I'll talk to couples about college because that's so important if they have young children. And they could be on completely different pages and never had a conversation about that before. Like it never even occurred to them to talk about it. And it can turn out sometimes that they have completely different stances where one person feels adamantly that they should contribute as much as possible to college, and then the other person says, well, I believe in college, but I also believe in the kids getting loans. So that's can often be a big sticking point. And those are important things to work out through the mediation, because we need to cover that stuff now. The goal is to, again, give them that safe space to address issues that may or may not come up down the road. But if we can kind of tackle those now, knowing that they could be potential issues, then it's the place to do it rather than after their divorce. We don't want them going back to court.
So in your opinion, what is the strongest point of the mediation process?
And in my opinion, the most important thing, the strongest point is really the self-determination of the process. And it's the empowerment that the process provides. My job is to give a legal education, not legal advice. So I really try to equip my clients with all the information that they need to make their own decisions. They are in the driver's seat the entire time in the mediation process. My office thinks that I just left. It just got all dark in here. So I like to say that I'm the GPS, they're the driver. I'm just helping them get from point A to point Z. But they are always making the decisions, and I just give them the information that they need to make those calls.
All right. Well, we are just about at the end of our time. So if someone wants to find out more about divorce mediation, or if they need your services, how can they get a hold of you?
They can call my phone number, which is 860-245-9369. And they can also go to our website, which is wemediatect.com, for wemediateconnecticut.com. And I offer complimentary consultations for anybody who is interested in learning more about this process and better understanding the timing, the costs, the respective roles of mediator and client, so that, they can make an informed decision about the best way to proceed.
All right. Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
I love focusing up front. I love really the purpose of collaborating and making things work out with each other, respecting each other. It's just so important to get things out like that, even if it hasn't happened during the marriage. It's the only way you're going to get through this thing moving ahead, because as far as I'm concerned, the divorce or the separation, whatever you want to call it, when they're apart is the one thing, but they got to live with everything moving ahead. And it's so important for each of the individuals involved, for their families, and so on and so forth. And we all have a choice in the present moment, as I've talked about all the time, to just approach things from a positive standpoint and realizing that that other person is a wonderful human being also. And so having somebody like you come up with this alternative to automatically conflicting, and I get this and I get that, and so on and so forth. I love that you're talking about a free consultation. I would encourage anybody out there that's having problems to take advantage of that free consultation, and maybe that will solve things up front. But it's so and so important what you're doing, and the approach, it's always been there. And it's just so great to talk about it a whole lot more, because most people just automatically go to the conflict side of things.
That's right.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is just how much this has to do with a lot of the topics we've talked about collaboration instead of conflict and working together, about goal setting, communications. It just shows how important these aspects are in all aspects of your life, not just, well, what do I want to do for my career, or what do I want to do for my business? These same processes need to be used in friendships, in marriages, in relationships. And it really does hammer home the fact that there's always people at the core of all of these situations. And if you actually listen to somebody, if you work with them, if you collaborate with them, you're going to get a better outcome than if you go right to conflict. And I think that's just so important. So, Jessica, thank you so much for being here this week. It's been great having you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I enjoyed it, and I love what you're doing with this podcast, and both, your outlooks and, what you're doing with communication and focus and all of that. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.